available to you that cater to you as a person. So we see that nobody cannot afford healthcare at all, ladies and gentlemen. We see that the varying levels available tailor to the varying levels of people in the United States based on their wealth, and we see that this is not a problem. And she also talked about how there are 45 million people in the United States without health care, ladies and gentlemen. As my partner already stated, like a quarter of them have chosen not to take health care, and I'm going to deal with the rest of them in my rebuilding, which I'm going to go into right now. No thanks. So the first point my partner talked about was efficiency. He said it's better, the best in the U.S. is better than the best in Canada. And what side opposition had to say to that is she said there's a really big waste of service. They're going to be putting out services all over the place to try and, cover all their bases. Okay, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, these services they're putting out are going to be twice as good as the services they're putting out in Canada. And secondly, we said that all the bases they're covering can actually be beneficial. We're not seeing that covering all the bases to be a bad thing, ladies and gentlemen. We see it to be a good thing. Sure.
But wouldn't you agree that more MRIs doesn't actually mean more lives saved? It just means more MRIs and more money?
Okay, but more MRIs could mean more cancer tumors discovered. I mean, there's a pretty logical connection there. So we're seeing that there could actually be benefits being reaped from having more tests being done. So we're not really seeing where you're going with that. The next thing she talked about, again, was not everyone can afford health care. And she said people are going to get it eventually in Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, eventually is not good enough. The United States, where you can get treatment tomorrow if you pay for it, is good enough. When you can get the best possible care, that's when it becomes good enough, ladies and gentlemen. Not when you are prioritized on a very long list, and when they get around to you, they will treat you. That's not good enough, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the next point my partner talked about was hidden costs. And he said that there are extra costs that are not necessarily covered in Canada that you may think that they are. And he talked about how there's universal coverage but not universal care, a quote from Theo Calder himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, what they said here is that they said, the costs are greater in the U.S. Ladies and gentlemen, cost comes second to health care. We believe that the health care you're getting comes first. The quality of the health care you are getting comes first. And in the United States, ladies and gentlemen, there is a clear higher quality of health care. We believe that that comes before cost. And even in the United States, cost is not as big of an issue as side government amps it up to be, as there is health care that everyone can have. And thirdly, my partner talked about the value of choice. And ladies and gentlemen, we believe that fundamentally, we believe in the power of the people, that people have the choice to either choose healthcare if they want to or not, and that everyone can have healthcare if they so desire. And as such, we beg to propose. Thank you.
I thank the member for her remarks. The second opposition will now deliver the last speech of the opposing case.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Nicole just came up here and categorized the Canadian system by saying eventually is not good enough. Well, Madam Speaker, I'd like to say eventually is a lot better than never, and I think that's what this case really comes down to. Diane's already told you why healthcare really isn't accessible for a lot of people within the United States. I'm going to further that point throughout my address today, and I'm going to tell you why the fact that it's not accessible is a really detrimental thing for our government to be perpetuating, and why ultimately, if I was going to get sick, which I'd rather not, I would rather be in Canada. So what I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to present two constructive arguments. First, I'm going to talk about how the United States system is a form of systematic discrimination. Then I'm going to talk about how a lack of health care in an individual's life makes it impossible to excel in other areas of life and why that's really bad. Then I'm going to move into some refutations of Nicole's points, and finally I'm going to rebuild all of Diane's points, which I think were really insightful and most of which still stand. So without any further ado, I'm going to get right into my first constructive point, which talks about systematic discrimination and how really the United States system basically takes a whole chunk of people and says, we don't care about you, and that's really bad and it's really discriminating against them. So what the proposition today has basically tried to do, Madam Speaker, is they've tried to tell you that everyone has a choice. Some people are choosing not to get health care, right? We don't really think of it that way on this side of the house. We think a lot of times your health isn't really a clear choice. We think a lot of times you have hereditary conditions. We think a lot of times you're born with certain health conditions, and that isn't me going out and smoking every day and saying I'm going to accept the consequences of this. I think a lot of times some people are born with certain conditions and they really don't have a choice. For instance, Madam Speaker, some individuals simply obtain cancer. They live very healthy lives, they do everything properly, they exercise every day, they eat properly, but one day they're diagnosed with cancer. Now what we're saying with the United States system is we're saying that we don't think of these people essentially as equal, because what the United States system preaches is essentially we're not going to give these people the same choice and benefit as everyone else. We're going to charge them a lot more for their health care because they have this pre-existing condition which the proposition would pass off as their choice. Sure.
You are aware that even if someone does doesn't have health insurance and chooses not to pay the $9,000, let's say, we pay in taxes every year, they can still go and see a doctor and pay the $300 for the appointment.
Sure, they could pay for that once, but we think in the long term they'll end up paying a lot more. We think a lot of people are unable to pay that extra amount. We think in a lot of cases in the United States, people won't be able to pay the long-term care for cancer that they would get for free in Canada. We think that's how they're being discriminated against. So why is it important, Madam Speaker, that we don't discriminate against people? Well, first of all, we think we don't discriminate against people in other areas of life, right? If someone's disabled, we don't not build them a wheelchair ramp. We don't not allow them to live in the same building as us just because they were born that way. We think as a government we have to go out for these people and say we still care about these people. We think they're an equal part of our society, and we think it's the duty of the rest of society, no thanks, to actually take a point and actually give and help these people out. We think that we have a duty as a government to actually go out for these people and actually help them have the same opportunity in life as everyone else. And because of that, we think that the Canadian system does a lot better job than that. We think the United States basically ignores these people. We think it puts them at an unfair advantage. And right now I'm going to move into my second point, which talks about how that unfair advantage actually makes it impossible for them to excel in a lot of different areas of life. So, Madam Speaker, I'd pose a question. If you are severely ill with something like cancer, knock on wood, let's hope you never are, but let's say you are, right? We think it would be really hard for you to excel in every other area of life. We think it would be hard for you, with that looming over your head, to actually go out and get a good education and to get a good job, per se, if that cancer isn't being treated. Yeah.
I presume it would also be really hard if while you had cancer and you couldn't do anything about it, you had to wait 8 weeks in Canada just to even begin your treatment when you could start Friday in the United States.
Okay, sure. So if there's an average citizen, I would say if I had cancer in Canada, I would rather wait 8 weeks than not have the money to have my cancer treated ever. I would say I could have it in the back of my mind that in 8 weeks I'm going to have this treated. I can go on with my life because I have treatment waiting. I don't have enough money to ever get treated, and I'm inevitably going to die. We think that's a lot worse than actually knowing the treatment's waiting for you. So moving on with this point, we don't think it's easy for someone to get educated when they have a huge disease looming over their head. We don't think they'll be very good at their job. We don't think they'll be able to contribute to society. That's a bad thing, Madam Speaker. We think that we want to foster citizens who are able to go out and actually contribute to society, who are able to do a good job at building up our society, and we don't think that if they have this healthcare issue looming over their heads like so many United States citizens do, they'll actually be able to do that. I think what we're doing is we're giving them this unequal playing field. And we're basically saying people who are born into lower classes in the United States don't have the same opportunities as everyone else. We're going to tell them that because you don't have the money to pay for your health care, you're not going to be able to receive treatment that you need, and as a result, you're not going to be able to get as far in society. We think that's a bad thing. We think that needs to end. We think Canada does a really good job at addressing that, and that's why ultimately we'd rather get sick in Canada. So now we're going to move into some refutations of the things Nicole brought up. She brought up two main constructive points. First, she talked about severity and how, in Canada we have too many people not in a real emergency room. Okay, first of all, we think that, anyone going to an emergency room kind of, for the most part, has enough common sense to know that, something's bad happened. We feel that, okay, if they want to wait 5 hours because they bumped their head on a table, fine. In 5 hours, we're okay with them being in that emergency room. We'd rather they get treated than have that bumped head, them thinking it's a concussion and being useless for the next 3 weeks, right? We'd rather them actually go to that emergency room and get care. We feel that Canada does a good job of prioritizing. I already brought this up in a POI. So we still have the most severe people being treated first. We think that's what's important. Emergency rooms aren't dysfunctional in Canada. They work really well. Everyone's treated. Some people have to wait if their injury isn't that serious. We don't think this is a problem. Nicole didn't tell us enough why it is. Next, she talked about liability. And her main point here was that, she would rather be sued by an individual than the government. Personally, Madam Speaker, I would rather have, this guy suing me than the government. I think it's a lot worse to have the government over your head saying, if you screw up our patients, we're going to, slam you with